There we go. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Spilling Tea. I am your host, Tiffany Daniels. And yes, as it is Friday, we are getting back to my series Down the Rabbit Hole in regards to the anti-vax movement. And if you thought that we were done with Andrew Wakefield, we are not even remotely close to being done with former Dr. Andrew Wakefield. In particular, we're about to go over an article that was done as a part of an investigative series by the the investigator Brian Deere. Now, I first read this gentleman's fine work back in 2010, and as soon as I did, I began to spread it everywhere like I was throwing confetti or passing party favors all over the message boards on wrongplanet.net and like back in the day where message boards were kind of our like primitive version of social media. It's brilliant work, and it literally was the work that finally got that article by Andrew Wakefield retracted, as well as played a large role in having his licenses to practice medicine revoked out in the UK. So we're going to be going into a little bit more depth, in particular because one of the most vocal advocates on the behalf of the since disgraced former Dr. Andrew Wakefield is none other than our current health secretary. God help us all. So, we are going to be starting to go through this. Now, this is a pretty long article we're going to be going through here. So, we definitely are not going to get through the whole thing today. And I will be coming back next Friday with the next piece to it. But I really want to get people's eyes on what's actually going on here, because the anti-vax movement as we know it now wasn't near what it has become before Andrew Wakefield put out his fraudulent so-called clinical study. It essentially gave the anti-vax movement wings, and lo and behold, it was literally the early era of the internet, so it spread like an unholy virus to susceptible, desperate parents begging for answers. You see, that's what folks like this do. They are all grifters at heart. They hearken back very much to the old traveling snake oil medicine men that used to be big, where they had whole theatrical productions of each different miracle cure. That is absolutely rampant in pseudoscience to this very day. In particular, they really hone in on the individuals that are a part of this anti-vax movement to sell them their snake oil fake remedies to make them cured. It's gotten more and more dangerous over the years, but it's never been more dangerous than it is right now with their absolutely dedicated acolyte, RFK Jr., head of public health. I'm sorry, folks, if you want to sit there, you're just fear-mongering. No, I'm not. You guys have no idea, no conception of what the risks are. And we are going to eventually go through not just the history of the anti-vax movement, but we are also going to go through what we know from history in regards to the diseases that these vaccines assist in helping us be immune to, and how they have devastated whole entire civilizations repeatedly since the dawn of man. So, without further ado, we're going to go ahead and get into it. But first, real quick, folks, you guys know in the description box you're going to find the link to what we are about getting ready to go through today, as long as the other links in regards to the other things we've gone over in regards to the Down the Rabbit Hole series. And trigger warning, this channel is marked not for kids for a reason. We use profanity on occasion and speak on dark subjects. So if your child's 16 and younger and watching this, parental supervision is very much advised. Also, if you're new to the channel, this is absolute, complete amateur hour over here. I do not know how to do any of the bells and whistles. I do not know how to edit anything within this format to save my soul. I am a whiz of, back in the day, PowerPoint. Then I could provide you with all the bells and whistles that you want. But this new media has me stumped. And considering we keep having new threats to the rights of disabled folk in this country every single day, unfortunately, I just don't have the time to keep up with it all. I begin to learn to make this a little bit more civilized and professional looking. So, apologies for that in advance. Alright. So, this is called How the Case Against the MMR Vaccine Was Fixed. And this was published back in January 6th of 2011. He had others too. I became a big fan. Alright, so, in the first part of a special BMJ series, Brian Deere exposes the bogus data behind claims that launched a worldwide scare of the measles, mumps, and rubella vaccine, and reveals how the appearance of a link with autism was manufactured at a London medical school. So, here is a part of what he was able to find. When I broke the news to the father of child 11, at first he did not believe me. Wakefield told us my son was the 13th child they saw, he said, gazing for the first time at the now infamous research paper which linked a purported new syndrome with the measles, mumps, and rubella MMR vaccine. There's only 12 in this. Oh, you poor dude. That's just the beginning. That paper was published in The Lancet on February 28, 1998. It was retracted on February the 2nd, 2010. Authored by Andrew Wakefield, John Walker Smith, and 11 others from the Royal Free Medical School, London. It reported on 12 developmentally challenged children and triggered a decade-long public health scare. Not just that, folks, but if you haven't noticed that fear-mongering has gotten worse, I don't know what to tell you other than maybe you should, put the phone down and go outside more. Because it's looking pretty bleak. And those who are working within the medical field, my mom, my sister-in-law, I've had my brother that was working as a medical assistant for quite a few years. It's looking pretty bleak and scary, folks, alright? My cousin's a nurse. You get where I'm going, right? It's not looking pretty. It is not looking pretty at all. So, let me go ahead and continue here. Onset of behavioral symptoms was associated by the parents with measles, mumps, and rubella vaccination in 8 of the 12 children, began the paper's findings. Adopting these claims as facts, it results section added in these 8 children, the average interval from exposure to the first behavioral symptoms was 6.3 days. Now, I have always had problems just to start off, literally just for starters, that this was a clinical study done with such a small sample of children. What do we know nowadays, right? That there is not just simply one form of autism that we have. It is a spectrum, and it affects each and every single one of us in very, very different ways. Mild in some areas, more severe in others. And that's pretty much true with all of us. With so much variance within the spectrum, for those of us who share this diagnosis, the fact that we used such a small sample of children before making such an overwhelming assertion should immediately begin to have red flags pop up for you all over the place. That is far too small of a sample of kids when you're dealing with a diagnosis that can be as varied as autism can be. You can't make such big, bold assumptions on such a small sample size when you're dealing with something like this. Right? Just saying. Let me go ahead and continue. Mr. 11, an American engineer, looked again at the paper. A 5-page case series of 11 boys and 1 girl, aged between 3 and 9 years. There was an old myth that was prevalent during the 90s and early 2000s that it was only very rarely that girls would be diagnosed as autistic. Since then, we have learned that that is actually not accurate at all. But what the female, us folks like myself, would do would often happen in one of 2 ways. If you're like me, you were constantly bullied, but you're a hell of an observer. What does that mean? That means I would observe very carefully somebody who was by far more socially acceptable than I was considered to be by our peers in the classroom, right? I used those observations to start the beginnings of creating my first mask, which means mimicking what I saw but seemed more acceptable socially. Now, that never worked because I have never really been good at, trying on a personality that I don't really have any real connection to. So as I got older, that's why when I began to mask, I would use things more from my mom, from my uncle, my dad, and even my brother Mike to forge that mask. Because if you are trying to create a mask and it's completely and utterly polar opposite to you and has no connection to you, kids can smell fake. And kids are cruel. But that's besides the point. I'll probably need to do a series on masking one of these days. Should these morons that are our current politicians could maybe stop for 5 minutes scaring the hell out of literally all of us who are disabled or elderly. I mean, one would think that wouldn't be much to ask, but here we are. But yeah, that's why females in the beginning were considered very rare for this diagnosis. Since then, it has proved that that is actually not at all the case. It was just, you cannot look at it the same way as you would see a boy that's suspected. It presents itself a little bit differently. Let me go ahead and continue. One moment, sorry, allergies. Alright, 9 children, it said, had diagnosis of regressive autism. I would like to bring to the forefront for all of you to know, especially you, Mr. Health Secretary, that there is, at this current time, no diagnosis within the current DSM-5 that has been called regressive autism. That diagnosis does not exist. The fact that we have people in power right now using that terminology, and especially considering that is not a classification of autism that actually exists. Again, another red flag, people. It's autism spectrum disorders. It's ASD. There is no diagnosis called regressive autism. Okay? There used to be a term before we realized it was a spectrum called Canner's autism. But again, that's its own subject. Regressive autism, like it was referred to in this paper, and like our current health secretary keeps referring to it as, does not exist as a diagnosis anywhere. And all but one were reported with non-specific colitis. The new syndrome brought these together, leaking brain and bowel diseases. His son was oh my gosh, I'm going to butcher this, folks. I apologize in advance. As much as I read, there's some words even I can't quite figure out. Pinu ultimate case. Now, allow me to verify for you all. I do not have bowel disease. I do have issues with acid reflux. That has to do with massive anxiety and PTSD. A lot of that has to do with being forced to live in a world that was not built for someone like me. As topped with all the abuse and the harassment and government insanity that comes with it. Just saying. Running his finger across the paper's tables over coffee in London, Mr. 11 seemed reassured by his anonymized son's age and other details. But then he pointed at table 2, headed neuropsychiatric diagnosis, and for a second time objected. That's not true. Child 11 was among the 8 whose parents apparently blamed MMR. The interval between his vaccination and the first behavioral symptom was reported as 1 week. The symptom was said to have appeared at age 15 months, but his father, whom I had tracked down, said that this was wrong. Woo! And again, I will bring up a point I have mentioned previously. When Andrew Wakefield and these people start talking about you're missing milestones when you hit the age of 2. What milestones for these kids sitting between the ages of newborn to 1.5, 2 years old? That would be crawling, making cute little baby noises. I mean, but they had communication issues. They're 1.5. But they don't want to interact with people. Have you looked outside recently? Nobody wants to deal with people. Nobody. Not even neurotypicals. They're just a lot better at faking it than we are. Okay? I'm sorry, but that has never made any coherent sense to me. You are 1.5 to 2 years old. You're not exactly the type of age where you're going to, like, be in Boy Scouts or, going over to your friend's house to spend the night. I mean, you're in two. Just me? Okay. It's still weird. I don't care who you are, that's weird. This symptoms was said to have appeared at age 15 months, like it said here, but his father, whom I tracked down, said that this was wrong. From the information you provided me on our son, who I was shocked to hear had been included in their published study, he wrote to me, after we met again in California, the data clearly appeared to be distorted. Who's surprised? Is anybody surprised? Anybody at all? Crickets? Cat TV, birds going off in the background there so that my cat can stay amused while I do these videos? Fair enough. Alright. He backed his concerns with medical records, including a royal-free discharge summary. Although the family lived 5,000 miles from the hospital, in February 1997, the boy, then age 5, had been flown to London and admitted for Wakefield's project, the undisclosed goal of which was to help sue the vaccine's manufacturers. And folks, if that does not sound like a grift to you, I don't know what to tell you. You are literally going to legal war against a vaccine manufacturer based off of skewed determinations of a clinical study with far too small of a group to make the kind of bold assertions that Wakefield was trying to make. I mean, is nobody seeing the red flags during that time at all? I mean, I know we don't know. We didn't know then as much as we know now. But going to war with Big Pharma, where your backup is an extremely small sample size that didn't even cover the range and nuances within the autism spectrum diagnosis. And you think this is going to work somehow? Me being autistic, I'm supposed to be the delusional broken one to society. But not these guys. Somehow. Okay. I hope to God there is no medicine that will ever magically turn me into a neurotypical, because if that makes me susceptible for this, I'd rather be shot. Not an understatement. Wakefield's syndrome. Unknown to Mr. 11, Wakefield was working on a lawsuit. Here we go. I've told you guys a little bit about this. Let's get in. For which he sought a bowel brain syndrome as its centerpiece, claiming an undisclosed 150. Oh my God. I'm rusty on English currency, folks. Just say 150 or 230 an hour US, an hour through a Norfolk solicitor named Richard Barr. He had been confidentially put on the payroll 2 years before the paper was published, eventually grossing him, well, you can see the expenses there. Give me just a moment. sinus medication and milk, you all. Sinus medication and milk. Alright, let's double check, make sure I'm still on. Okay, good. Now, we were getting back to Wakefield syndrome. So, they were on the payroll 2 years before the paper was published. Eventually grossing him, you see all those expenses there, correct? More red flags. You're on a payroll for a lawsuit that hadn't really came quite to fruition yet. 2 years later, you publish this work with an absolutely dinky, small sample of individuals who are autistic. Nobody's seeing the problems here because I may not have my mom's experience in healthcare or medical care. I'm just common sense. But that's got like red flags all over it. You know? Why don't you just take out a megaphone, Mr. Wakefield, and just yell at the top of your lungs that you're a fraud repeatedly? Because, you know, it's kind of what that's doing there. Let me continue. Curiously, however, Wakefield had already identified such a syndrome before the project which would reputedly discover it. Ooh. You see, in scientific circles, it's usually frowned upon to already believe in a syndrome. You already believe this is a thing before you conduct the study. You're not just somebody who's seeing something suspicious and you decide to do a clinical study to try and see what's going on. This is, your mind is already made up that this is a thing that exists before you begin the study. And the reason why that's bad, folks, is because of confirmation bias. You cannot objectively conduct a study of this nature if you have already predetermined in your head that this is something that exists. Because you lack objectivity that such a study would require. Right? Another red flag. Children with enteritis, disintegrative disorder, an expression he used for bowel inflammation and regressive autism, again with the diagnosis that doesn't actually exist anywhere. You couldn't even find the term regressive autism in the DSM-4, folks. I know. I was one of the individuals that was being reached out to right as they were starting to put together the new and current DSM-5 and put comments in from my region as an employee for the Department of Mental Health, as a disability rights advocate, and as an autistic myself. It didn't exist even then. Red flag, all the red flags. Form a part of a new syndrome. He and Barr explained in a confidential grant application to the UK's Government Legal Aid Board before any of the children were investigated. See, this is insane. If you're the individuals who are providing this grant money for a study to be conducted, if there is any inclination at all that the individuals seeking to carry out the study have already made it in their heads that this is a disorder that actually exists before even conducting such a study, you should probably not be giving them that grant money. They are not going to have an objective view of the evidence while going through said study. Like, what are we doing here? What are we doing? Can I just, like, go to a research agency and, I don't know, declare, like, I want to do a study on too many hats syndrome, and I need about $500,000 and a absolute lifelong amount of, I don't know, white cheddar cheese from Ireland to conduct this study. But I'm going to tell you, the too many hat syndrome does exist. So I want to do a study to prove it. Could that be a thing? Because I'll be honest with you, I'm not proud I'd do it. If I actually thought that would work, I would probably do it, because look at our world, folks. At this point, I don't have any more shame. I just want to go find my own island somewhere with my cat and just, yeah. Anyways, back to the subject here. Nevertheless, the evidence is undeniably in favor of a specific vaccine-induced pathology, because you already made your mind up that it did before you conducted the study. You set yourselves up for confirmation bias. There was no objectivity here. You did not at any point allow yourself to be open enough that while you were conducting the study, if the exact opposite was what was being shown by the evidence, like, you didn't even consider that as something that could happen. That's the problem with confirmation bias. You've already made it up in your mind that this is it. This is the thing. This is why. That's not how science works. That's not how clinical studies are supposed to be conducted. When you do a clinical study, you have to be open to being proven wrong. Or even the unlooked for things that may pop up during the duration of a clinical study that you never considered before. If you've already closed your mind off and you decide you already know the answer before you conduct the study, then it's confirmation bias. You have already closed yourself off to any other answer than what you've already decided to be the truth. Right? Yeah. Let me go ahead and continue. The two men also aim to show a sudden onset temporal association, strong evidence in product liability. Dr. Wakefield feels that if we can show a clear time link between vaccination and onset of symptoms, Barr told the legal board, we should be able to dispose of the suggestion that it's simply a chance encounter. Not with only 12 kids, you can't. You really expect me to believe that with a clinical study of 12 kids, that your results apply to everyone? Oh my God. But they're pro-science. Let me continue. But child 11's case must have proved a disappointment. Records show his behavioral symptoms started too soon. His developmental milestones were normal until the age 13 months of age. Again, I'm going to ask, what developmental milestones are we talking about here? But they stop not to engage socially anymore. They're 1.5. Again, if they were suddenly engaging socially in a brilliant manner, I don't know, but it gives Damien from The Omen, okay? None of us, neurotypical or neurodivergent, were hypersocial around that age. I'm going to keep saying that until I die. I'm going to be senile, and I'm still going to be saying it. Notes the discharge summary. In the period 13 to 18 months, he developed slow speech patterns and repetitive hand movements. Oh no! Slow hand movements! Surely the end is nigh! But would you guys stop? It's weird looking. You need to stop. And hear me out on this. If me stimming is so deeply concerning and bothers other people, you do have the option to walk in the opposite direction instead of disturbing me or humiliating one of my far younger autistic brethren. Just a thought. Over this period, his parents remarked on his slow, gradual deterioration. They all do. But again, what are the milestones they're talking about? These are still babies. It seems like very weird, unreasonable expectations on people who are extremely young that not even neurotypicals wouldn't necessarily be able to meet if we're talking realistically here. Which, I know, nobody does that anymore but folks like myself, but what can I say? My small little smidgen of faith left in humanity kind of drives me to try at least to bring some people to reason, if humanly possible. That put the first symptom 2 months earlier and then reported in the Lancet, and a month before the boy received the MMR vaccination. And this was not the only anomaly to catch the father's eye. What the paper reported as a behavioral symptom was noted in the records as a chest infection. See? This is the issue with confirmation bias, folks. You see what you want to see, and then whatever you produce clinical study-wise is just going to confirm what you've already decided in your head beforehand was the truth, which is why it is not real science. Let me continue. Please let me know if Andrew W. has his doctor's license revoked, wrote Mr. 11, who is convinced that many vaccines and environmental pollutants may be responsible for childhood brain disorders. His misrepresentation of my son in his research paper is inexcusable. His motives for this I may never know. Alright. The father need not have worried. My investigation of the MMR issue exposed the frauds behind Wakefield's research, triggering the longest ever UK General Medical Council fitness to practice hearing, and forcing the Lancet to retract the paper. Last May, it led to Wakefield and Walker Smith being struck off the medical register, which means, layman's terms, out in the US, they lost their licenses to be able to practice medicine inside the UK, as they should have. If we're doing confirmation bias science, you have no, you should not be practicing medicine on anyone. I'm sorry, but not sorry. Right? Wakefield, now 54, he's in his 60s now, who called no witnesses, was branded dishonest, unethical, and callous. Walker Smith, now 74, the senior clinician in the project, was found to have presided over high-risk research without clinical indication or ethical approval. The developmentally challenged children of often vulnerable parents were discovered to have been treated like the doctor's guinea pigs. That was done a lot, especially in the 90s. A lot of lawsuits came out because of that. Alright, folks. We're going to go ahead and stop it here for now. We're going to get into the lawsuit test case that Brian and Deere reported on coming up here next Friday. But in the meantime, folks, I do want to thank you for your time today and being here with us at Spilling Tea. We do not really get a whole lot of views because, let's face it, pretty amateur, right? But if you could hit like, hit subscribe, go ahead and hit the comments, I would definitely appreciate it, because it may be amateur hour, but the information that we are providing, all of us all together, within the disability rights community and out of it in medical care and healthcare circles, is extremely important. And we would like to get into the algorithm to get this information out there to the people who need it the most. Those absolutely vulnerable and desperate parents who are constantly being preyed upon by these new age snake oil salesmen. And many of them have lost thousands of dollars in the process. If we can in any way, shape, or form use this information to be able to save anyone from that, I would definitely would like to do so. And folks, as always, we here at Spilling Tea hope you have a good one. We will see you for next Friday's new episode of Down the Rabbit Hole. Bye, everyone.